In the kingdom of Patria, the north and south countries were at war. The southern country had a much greater population and power, but the northern country tried its best to fight back. As a chaotic battle unfolds near a massive fortress, soldiers from the northern country try their best to reach and invade the fortress, but the southern army is too strong for them. The situation seems hopeless for the southern soldiers, but suddenly, strange people dressed in white robes enter the battlefield. A calm man wearing glasses suddenly transforms into a terrifying dragon that soaks up attacks and immediately breaks into the enemy walls. Enemy soldiers get scared as more and more monsters start appearing and destroying their forces like they were made out of paper. These monsters quickly invade the fortress and completely defeat the southern force, which looked unbeatable just a minute ago. The northern soldiers stare at these beastly people in shock and remember that these godly half-beasts called incarnates are actually their own friends. After the battle is over, an army major congratulates Captain Hank in front of his friend Kane for the great victory. Hank remembers all the northern soldiers who sacrificed themselves, but the major thinks that their lives were lost for a noble cause. He dismisses the two incarnates, and his assistant asks the major if trusting the beasts is a good idea. The major, who was just smiling like a proud senior, reveals his true colors, arrogantly saying that the beasts were just weapons to win the war. Hank and Kane enter a tent and ask Elaine if she has figured out a cure for some of the incarnates' mysterious sickness. Elaine, who is the creator of the incarnates, tells Hank that she'll do her best to find a cure. Hank notices that she is worried and pats her shoulder in a comforting way before Kane reminds him that he's still watching. An embarrassed Hank quickly runs out as Kane laughs, thinking that his best friend hasn't changed at all. Outside the tents, the dragon man William and another incarnate are celebrating together. William tells the man about his kind daughter at home, Shawl, who runs an orphanage. The man gets interested in getting to know Shawl and asks William if he can set him up with her. Before he can do that, Hank walks to the table and asks to meet William's kind daughter one day as well. Suddenly, the rest of the gang starts teasing him, saying he shouldn't be cheating on Elaine. Hank is shocked that they're thinking about such things, and the gang starts pressuring him to confess his feelings for Elaine. In the face of all this pressure, the captain forgets to bring his balls from home and tells everyone that he'll confess after the war is over. After everyone gets disappointed, Kane and Elaine walk over and Hank makes sure they don't hear about anything the group is discussing. After the celebrations, the northern soldiers started taking away southern prisoners the next day. Suddenly, one of the incarnates who was guarding the soldiers starts eating them like cupcakes, shocking everyone. The soldiers immediately light up the monster as Hank comes over, screaming for his friend. He hears the monster say he doesn't want to hurt the men and calls for a medic. But none of the soldiers want to help the monster. Before Hank notices, the monster, named Abai, offs himself, not wanting to stay in the world anymore. At Abai's funeral, Hank tells the rest of the incarnates that they are good people who gave their bodies to help in the war. He promises to find the cure for the strange disease, making them all lose control. A frustrated Elaine runs back to her tent, crying with guilt as the creator of these beasts. Hank's words seem to have no effect on the people, so he thinks for a bit. Suddenly, he announces that their final fight is approaching, the only fight left to take over the southern country's capital. Hank promises that if they win the war, he will propose to Elaine. This promise of drama and romance immediately makes everyone forget their unalive friend like some sort of trash, and they all start cheering for Hank instead.
That was easy.
Afterward, Hank and Kane discuss things in a tent. Kane thanks Hank for his great leadership and words of encouragement, but Hank tells him that he could never have achieved anything without his team. Hank then sighs, remembering their childhood friendship with him. He then leaves to comfort Elaine, who takes him outside her tent. She reveals that the war will soon be over because the North will discuss a peace treaty with the South. Hank feels relieved that they will achieve peace soon. However, Elaine suddenly turns around and uses her Nerf gun on Hank. He gets shocked before Elaine reveals that the incarnates are beasts who are doomed to lose their sanity sooner or later. Elaine cries as she hugs him, saying she cannot find a cure for them, so she plans on disposing of all the beasts before they cause any harm to innocent people. Kane reveals himself, who also seems to know about her plan. However, before Elaine can turn back to look at him, he betrays her and takes her out in front of Hank's shocked eyes. Hank passes out as Kane starts laughing like a maniac. He later wakes up in a bed. A woman with two very big plots named Lisa greets Hank, saying that he has been in a coma for months. She tells him that the war is over and peace has been achieved between the two nations. Hank then asks her where Kane is, but Lisa is surprised, saying she was going to ask him that question. She tells him that Kane suddenly went missing one day with Elaine and incarnates have escaped into different parts of the world. Hank remembers what Kane did and grows furious that he ruined Elaine's plan. He angrily storms out of the room and sees a fellow incarnate named Eddie causing destruction in a nearby town. Eddie has gone out of control and tells Hank that humans are just weak little pawns under his control. Hank sees the insanity and corruption in him and transforms into a werewolf beast. taking out his former friend with zero hesitation. In a flashback, a young girl named Shawl brings tea to some children in an orphanage. The kids complain that the tea isn't tasty enough and Shawl apologizes, explaining that they don't have too much because of a food shortage. She later goes out with her father William to get some groceries from the market. The market is also short, so William suggests that they try hunting for some food. William tries teaching Shawl how to hunt with a rifle by helping her aim at a deer. The opportunity is perfect, but the gentle girl is unable to pull the trigger, letting the animal escape. The kids and everyone else get disappointed as they return with just mushrooms. But William cheers them up, saying it's not easy to unalive an animal. He pats his daughter's head, saying she will be able to make hard decisions when the time comes. Once everyone gets close to their home, though, they notice some soldiers outside. William tells the kids to go inside as he deals with him. He later comes back home at night after everyone is done having dinner. Shawl pours him a cup of tea and asks what happened. William seriously tells her that he has a special power to help the army win the war. Shawl wants him to stay at home and take care of the kids, but her father wants to protect the peace for everyone in the town. William prepares to leave the next morning, leaving everyone waiting for his return. Back to the present after the war ended. The army returns a massive dragon to the village. Shawl is shocked at first to see the creature, but when the dragon softly touches her face, she believes that it is her father and celebrates. Now a dragon, William lives happily with the kids, taking them out for rides on his back. Life goes back to normal, but Shawl finds it more and more difficult to buy food for the kids. One day, things go wrong as the villagers start hearing terrifying roars from somewhere. It's William in his dragon form, his illness making him angry. Shawl goes out, shocked to see him in such a state. The next morning, villagers knock on her door with a bell in their hands. They explain that a lot of their farm animals have started going missing, and that they need her father to wear the bell. Shawl is angry but calms down, realizing that they have a right to suspect her monster father. Unfortunately, they also send away the kids in her orphanage to another town since it is getting dangerous for them to be around the dragon. The kids leave in a carriage, crying for home, but ultimately are taken away. Shawl starts crying despite the villagers' comfort and runs back to her house. She feels empty after seeing her house without any life. She goes out and talks to her father, wondering if the two of them can run away somewhere and live together. William quietly listens to her before he turns around and leaves for a nearby forest. Later, during a rainy night, Shawl hears William screaming in the forest as a fire erupts. She quickly rushes out to help her father, only to see him on the ground with a strange man aiming his weapon Nerf toy at him. William looks back at his daughter one more time before closing his eyes forever. Shawl is shocked that she has lost her father. Her love for him never faded even after he turned into a monster, and the girl cries her heart out while hugging him. The next morning, while remembering the strange man who took away her gentle father, Shawl prepares to leave the village. She vows to get her revenge and leaves the village with a rifle and a determined expression. Shawl's journey takes her through many deserts and villages until she finally finds traces of someone related to the legendary incarnate beast. In a small tavern, she finds the same strange man sitting inside. Shawl immediately opens the door and, remembering what he did, attacks the man without warning. Everyone inside the tavern is shocked, but the man takes the bullet like it is a paintball and immediately runs out, taking Shawl with him. He takes her to a quiet alley and asks her about her identity. Shawl introduces herself as William's daughter, and the man realizes why she attacked him. She asks him why he took away her poor father, but the man suddenly hears the townsfolk talking about a certain beast and leaves to take care of the problem. The man walks out and sees a beast named Danny handing over some bloody jewelry to his mom. Danny thinks that selling the items will help his mom live, but the strange man starts approaching him. He points out that recently, traveling merchants have been getting attacked by a strange monster. He accuses Danny of being the culprit, and the monster asks the man to reveal his identity. The man takes off his hood, revealing himself to be Captain Hank. Shawl questions if Hank has any proof that Danny attacked those travelers, so Danny takes it upon himself to prove Hank right. He screams that he asked the travelers nicely, but because they refused to give him their life savings, he took away their lives instead. The man turns into an even uglier beast and goes wild. The townsfolk think everyone is in danger, but Hank suddenly appears on Danny's shoulder. Despite Danny's struggles, he easily defeats him before cornering him with his weapon. Before killing him, Hank remembers how the real Danny was a kind man who just wanted to work and support his village. Danny tells Hank that he is just trying his best. As his mom cries out in pain, Danny asks Hank if he and the other incarnates deserve to lose their lives after the war ended. This question brings pain to Hank's face, but he ends the job. As Danny's mother cries for her late son, Shawl gets angry and asks if Hank is going to continue taking out his friends. She asks why he has to do this after the war ended, pretending that Danny wasn't just going on a murderous rampage after someone refused to give him their money. Hank tells her that he needs to stop the rest of the incarnates before they hurt more people, but Shaw is not convinced that he is right. She tells him that she'll follow him herself to find out why her father had to lose his life. The next day, Shaw wakes up from a nightmare, reliving her father's final moments. Hank tells her to get up and start moving. Still feeling upset about traveling with the man she hates, Shaw walks closely until a carriage comes up to the two of them. The kind carriage driver offers to give them a lift to their location but gets shocked upon learning which town they're headed for. Shaw asks why it's a problem and discovers that the town is still stuck in the war. Once the two of them get off at the town, Shaw is surprised by a massive structure nearby. She learns that it's a big fortress before suddenly, Lisa pops out of nowhere. She tells Shaw to leave for a bit, thinking she is just some lost girl with Hank, but gets surprised after learning that she is traveling together with him. Lisa apologizes before taking the two of them to a hotel room. There, she reveals that the incarnate making the fortress is called Minotaur, and he keeps using the town's land and resources to make it bigger and bigger every day. Shaw suddenly asks Hank if he is going to defeat Minotaur as well. She thinks that they can just convince the beast to stop making the fortress, but suddenly a loud sound interrupts her. The Minotaur comes out to the top of his fortress and announces to everyone to prepare their weapons and get ready for war. Shaw is surprised by this and Hank starts moving. He tells Lisa to get some stuff ready for him and that he'll be attacking the fortress at night. Shaw still feels sad that the Minotaur who fought bravely in the war has to go now, but Lisa takes her somewhere to explain. She shows her all the homeless people in town, saying it's Minotaur's fault that more and more people have to live their lives in stress and homelessness. Shaw goes quiet and wonders what Minotaur is still trying to fight, learning from Lisa that only incarnates know what their friends are feeling. She then gives Shaw a bullet with the power to take out an incarnate for emergencies. Later at night, Shaw takes a bath and tries knocking on Hank's door to ask a question. When he doesn't answer, she enters anyway and finds him speaking a woman's name in his sleep. Hank gets up and asks her if she heard anything, but she says no. He then puts on his coat and prepares to leave for the fortress. Shaw follows him around, surprised when they enter a massive maze full of walls and traps. She wonders how one beast was able to build this by himself, but realizes that he had all the time and resources in the world to do it. Hank warns her to be careful since there are traps around, but Shaw comically gets scared and immediately sets one off. She gets protected by plot armor in the form of Hank before walking further along. Shaw asks Hank what Minotaur was like as a person and learns that he was a coward. Hank had told him to be prepared for a battle to fight his fears, and Minotaur took that way too literally. Up ahead, Hank and Shaw see a gate, but Hank locks it before going inside, revealing he doesn't want to take Shaw with him. Lisa suddenly pops up behind, ready to take Shaw home. However, she sees how determined Shaw is and helps her open the door. Once Hank gets to the top, he meets Theo the Minotaur. The man welcomes his captain, telling him that he built the best fortress in the world to protect himself against the enemy. Hank suddenly points his spear at Theo, who thinks he is betraying him. He immediately sets off a bunch of traps and begins attacking Hank. Downstairs, Lisa and Shaw run along, hearing the explosions as Shaw asks what kind of incarnate Hank is. Before Lisa can tell her, they get to the top and see Hank on the ground. Shaw gets worried, but Hank suddenly gets up and shakes off Minotaur's attack. He reveals his power, a strong werewolf body that shines at night. With his full power, Hank manages to hurt the Minotaur. The bipedal bull gets scared, remembering his fear of death. He starts panicking and Hank easily defeats him. Once Theo is on the ground, he returns to his human form. He calmly asks Hank about his fate. Once he learns that he will be going to the afterlife soon, Theo calms down. He feels happy that he can finally stop feeling fear. Hank lets him have his final moments before finishing off the scared man. Watching the scene, Shaw thinks about her father's last moments. She wonders if the incarnates left the world peacefully, and what her father said to Hank for his last words. Somewhere else the next day, a handsome young man is riding a horse in a city. This is Captain Claude, leader of the Beast Extermination Squad, whose goal is to take out all of the incarnates in the world. In a shady building, a handsome man sits with a little girl. He looks at a photo of Hank, laughing at the news that Hank has this mysterious girl traveling with him. Going back to the past, a calm man is drawing something in his sketchbook. Hank comes up to him and asks him what he's drawing before the scene shifts to a dark forest in the night. A hunter sighs, feeling the cold when suddenly he hears a rumbling sound. The man gets on guard, thinking it's an animal, but when the earth starts to shake beneath his feet, he gets scared as a massive beast approaches him. Somewhere else on a train, Shaw looks around, amazed by the scenery of the canyons around her. A friendly conductor tells her that she'll be able to see a big bridge soon, which leaves her excited. She sees a massive iron bridge ahead of the train, and the conductor explains that it is the bridge uniting the North and South continents after the war ended. to the two nations. This bridge represents the peace they achieve. As they're discussing this, nearby, some soldiers line up to attack and stop a massive beast. However, they're unable to even scratch it and run away from the threat. Shaw's train suddenly stops, leaving everyone confused. Lisa comes up to Hank as well, saying that the incarnate behemoth is getting closer and closer to the bridge. She takes Hank and Shaw away to discuss a strategy with them. Lisa points out that the behemoth is quickly approaching the bridge and needs to be stopped before it destroys it all. Lisa wonders why Behemoth wants to cross the bridge and asks Hank if he knows why. He thinks about it but says no before thinking about how to stop the monster. He points out that the monster recovers all his injuries and gets stronger wherever it gets hit, but there is still a way to take it down. The soldiers act according to Hank's plan and make a formation to surround the incoming monster. Hank leads the attack as the soldiers distract the monster, sneaking behind its limbs to attack its weak joints. Because the back of the monster has never gotten hit, the flesh there is still weak and gets injured. Once the monster goes down, the soldiers get to work and bind it with a bunch of ropes and nails. However, as they work to restrain the giant beast, Shaw learns that Behemoth hasn't actually hurt a person yet. She tries talking to the big monster after learning this and tries convincing it to stop going towards the bridge. Shaw asks it to not destroy the bridge that represents the peace between the two nations, but Behemoth doesn't listen and quickly gets up, easily destroying its binding. Meanwhile, a carriage arrives at the military camp Hank is staying in. The master of the railways comes out, escorted by his team. He starts screaming at Lisa for not taking care of the monster, but she explains that she has a plan to block off the way to the bridge with an explosion and fill it with rocks. However, the railway master thinks that it's too inefficient and they should instead make the budget Godzilla go boom. He keeps pushing to destroy the thing, but Hank refuses, saying he will stick to his own plan. The frustrated railway minister leaves, and Hank gets the soldiers to start their setup. He heads out and helps soldiers set the explosives and traps for their future mission. Shaw interrupts Hank and asks who the man that is Behemoth is. Hank tells her that he was a man named Arthur who loved to draw. Shaw then asks him why he keeps heading in a certain direction and if there is something there that the monster needs. Hank remembers something but says that even if there is, his mission of taking out the beast will not change. He tells her that even though the beast is peaceful, it will destroy the bridge that the incarnates worked so hard to build. Shaw tells him that it's not fair to ignore the monster's wishes, but Hank doesn't care. Later, Shaw asks Lisa if there is a way to help Behemoth peacefully. Lisa shakes her head, saying that because of how huge the monster is, it will always be dangerous and they would need to make it disappear sooner or later. Night arrives and some strange masked men sneak into the soldiers' camps. Shaw, who can't sleep, gets up to try to talk to Behemoth once again. Unfortunately, she is unable to do anything as a massive explosion shakes the nearby land. The masked men laugh, thinking they have destroyed the beast. But when the Behemoth gets angry and starts running, they all change the color of their pants to brown. Hank realizes what has happened and asks his soldiers if they are ready to finish the job. He transforms into her werewolf form and stops the dinosaur from charging into the bridge. The soldiers watch on, shocked as the small wolf stops the massive beast in its tracks. Hank then starts attacking Behemoth, which tries to step on him. However, he is strong enough to lift up its foot and trip it. This is his signal for the soldiers to make their move, and they detonate a bunch of explosives, trapping Behemoth under rocks. Then, they make a pile of mines detonate which makes a big O shape in the monster's belly. Hank thinks that such a big injury should stop even this great beast, but the monster keeps moving forward with ketchup juice spilling out of its stomach. Shaw and Hank both beg Behemoth to stop, pleading for it to show some humanity. However, things seem hopeless and it almost reaches the bridge. Suddenly, Hank orders the soldiers to detonate another small patch of explosives. This reveals a beautiful sun shining on the ocean straight ahead. Behemoth stops in its tracks after seeing the sea, tears running through its eyes. Finally, after having its dream fulfilled, it loses its strength and falls to the ground. Hank later tells Shaw that seeing the ocean for the first time was Arthur's greatest wish. He feels guilty that even though he fulfilled Arthur's dream, it also cost him his life. He later heads back to camp, where Lisa informs him that she has found the person she is looking for. Shaw is confused, but Hank gets a furious expression on his face. She reveals that the man is none other than Kane Madhouse, the villain who unleashes all the incarnates on the world. Somewhere else in a quiet alley, a handsome man is walking along. Some beautifully dressed women notice him and try to have some fun with him, looking for some money. The man approaches one of them and tries to remove some dust from her neck with his mouth. The woman thinks he is just having fun, but suddenly, something changes and she steps back. Her friend gets worried about her and holds her to make sure she is okay. She gets rewarded when the other woman grins and eats her like steak. The handsome man, none other than Kane, walks away with a strange little girl following him around. Hank, Liz, and Shaw later visit the town where Kane was reported to be. They go around the streets and ask the people if they've seen anyone suspicious, but none of them want to cooperate with someone from the military. Lisa tries getting Hank to take a break and relax before going further, but he is too focused and moves on. After Hank finishes his search, he goes to a hotel room to rest. Shawl enters the room and informs him that Lisa has gone away to check if there have been more victims. Then, she tries asking a question, but the scene shifts to a young woman running away from some strange beast. A young boy watches her from a corner, her screams and tomato juice making his eyes widen in horror. Back to Shawl, she starts fixing Hank's coat which she damaged with her own bullet. She tells him that because she used to run an orphanage, she is used to mending clothes. Hank smiles, revealing that he also grew up in an orphanage. Surprisingly, he used to be a troublemaker child, causing problems for everyone around him. However, a young girl named Elaine would always happily fix up his clothes for him. As Hank sees Shawl in front of him, he realizes how similar the two girls are. He tells her that her blue eyes are just like another person she knows, and Shawl guesses that it's Elaine. Hank is shocked that she knew her but learns that she heard him say her name in a nightmare. Shawl then learns that Elaine was sadly killed by the evil Cain. She goes to bed, thinking about how difficult the situation with the incarnates was and that Cain ruined Elaine's plan to peacefully end them all. Her thoughts get interrupted by an anxious Lisa who tells her that another victim has been found. Shawl goes out to see an ugly scene of a poor woman attached to a wall like a painting, the funny red jam pouring out of her hands. Hank asks Lisa if the wounds on her body match the other victims, and learns that it was caused by some sort of claws. Suddenly, a young man comes in, saying that he saw the statue demon that nerfed the woman. The people around him don't believe the boy, but the quiet Hank does and asks him to lead the way to the statue. The boy leads them to a church which is the lair of this incarnate. Shawl asks Hank about what kind of person he is, and Hank recalls a man named Christopher who loved to enforce justice. Chris was a brave man who wanted nothing more than to defeat the southern people whom he considered villains. His obsession with justice seems to be the reason why so many people are getting attacked in this city. The young boy asks Hank if he'll get rid of Chris, and Lisa asks him if he has a grudge against the beast. She offers to help him like the comforting big sister she is, so the boy gets close to her. He pulls off a Sigma move and pulls up Lisa's shirt to expose her dangerous plot devices before running away.
Yes! 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 Yes!
After Shawl calms Lisa down, she runs off to follow the boy. She asks him why he isn't heading back home so late, but the boy has his own questions. He feels angry that she is working with the cruel military, but Shawl tells him that she lost her father in Hank's mission of eliminating the beasts as well. This makes the boy grow quiet, and he recalls how his poor mother who did some wrong things to survive in the city got brutally deleted by the beast Gargoyle. Suddenly, the demon appears out of nowhere. Shawl asks Gargoyle why he is taking innocent lives, but the monster thinks that he is doing justice by eliminating criminals from the city. He then flies to attack Shawl, but Hank arrives in time to save her. Gargoyle knows that Hank is here for him and challenges him to visit the church later. Once Gargoyle goes back to his lair, he meets Cain. Cain asks the monster why he doesn't just wipe out the city to erase all the evil, but Gargoyle thinks that it would go too far. Cain gives up on convincing him and gives him a god-killer bullet which has the power to paralyze or even delete an incarnate beast. Later, Hank finally enters the church and begins fighting Gargoyle. Back in her room, Shawl thinks about what she is going to do next. She notices her rifle and the young boy missing and gets up to run to the church. Hank and Chris keep on fighting, with Chris thinking he is being the best enforcer of justice. Chris recalls his efforts on the battlefield. He thinks that the people from the South were all villains and none of them deserved a peaceful ceasefire. It was his extreme beliefs that led him to become this cruel punisher. Hank keeps fighting Chris in his werewolf form and manages to get the upper hand. Chris gets surprised by his strength, but suddenly, he reveals a Nerf weapon and Hank gets screwed by a special god killer. The attack makes Hank lose all strength and he collapses to the floor helplessly. After Hank gets defeated, Chris holds him up, preparing to finish him off. Hank tries to remind Chris about his humanity. Chris thinks about the first time he came back home from the war, watching everything that happened in his hometown. He had seen a little boy steal a fruit from a vendor. Suddenly, he focuses on the present as the young boy from before approaches him with a rifle. Chris knocks back the young boy who gets supported by Shawl. He remembers Chris feeling sorry for another child who had to steal to survive. Chris had tried to comfort the kid. However, the child got terrified of the beast in front of him and tried attacking him. This attack had made Chris lose all of his empathy and compassion for other people, and he had erased the boy he was trying to help. He remembers his mission and begins charging at Shawl and the young boy, who close their eyes in fear. Suddenly, Hank takes out the bullet from his body and stops Chris. He ends the job with Chris, putting an end to his terror. Before Hank and Shawl can properly mourn Chris, though, some spider webs restrain Hank. Cain comes out from some shadows with a spider lady and a little girl with him. Kane gives Hank an invitation to a party before leaving with Shaw, challenging him to come to get her. A memory of Elaine getting put to sleep appears once again in Hank's mind while he's unconscious. He wakes up and finds himself back in the hotel room where he was staying, with a young boy named Andy taking care of him. Andy seems worried about Shaw, but Hank reassures him that he'll bring her back safe and sound. Shifting to Shaw herself, a young girl walks around her, curious about this new friend. She licks some ketchup juice from her tied hands but thinks it tastes horrible. Shaw asks her about her name and learns that it's Migliglia. As the girl continues to circle around her, the spider lady comes in, curious about Shaw as well. Once she learns that Shaw is actually William's daughter, she realizes why she was traveling with Hank. She tells the girl that she is not in any danger and is just being used as bait by Kane. With one of her legs, she starts taking off Shaw's shirt, surprising her. Back in the city, Captain Claude is ready to begin his move. He examines all the bodies of Gargoyle's victims and finds a man with extremely weird wounds on his body. Claude realizes that this person was not a victim of Gargoyle. Instead, they had gotten devoured by one of Kane's victims. With this clue, he prepares to track down Kane and take him down. Later at night, Hank reaches the location for Kane's party. He enters a grand mansion, where a rich nobleman greets him. The man seems interested in Hank, but leaves after getting heavily ignored. Soon, Kane starts a speech in front of a big audience. Everyone around him seems to be from some sort of elite family. Kane begins talking about how the government uses propaganda to make people believe that they did everything for the better of the people. He points out that it was the North who had started the war out of greed for the South's resources. Kane also brings up that the incarnate beasts, who had sacrificed their bodies for their country, were just used and discarded as weapons. The crowd cheers, agreeing with his words. Then, Kane reminds them that the North government betrayed the people for their own interest, signing a peace treaty with the South despite all their efforts. He proposes that a new government be formed and replace the corrupt old one. With this statement, Kane signals for some incarnate beasts to come out. He tells the nobles that these beasts will help him take down the current government and take over the country. A rich man smiles, praising Kane for his hard work and strategy, but soon one of the beasts squashes him like a bug. Kane's eyes narrow and he grins evilly, telling the idiot nobles that their usefulness has come to an end. All of the incarnate beasts launch an attack on the weak crowd, and Hank tries to save as many people as he can. Kane sees this and reminds Hank of what Elaine said, that the incarnates will all become soulless beasts one day. He doesn't agree with this, thinking that it's unfair that he had to stop living after giving up so much for the country. Kane does not want to forgive the government and the rich for using him and his friends like weapons and now wants all power to himself. However, Hank knows that he has been corrupted and points a spear at him, ready to take him down. The incarnates all surround Hank, but suddenly the windows around them break and the military shows up as well. Claude orders all the beasts to be destroyed. With the military's efforts, the beasts disappear one by one. Claude gets up to the stage to fight Kane, revealing himself to be his angry younger brother. Before he can touch Kane, though, another beast comes up to guard him. Two more beasts come in and join in on the fun, ready to end Claude there. Luckily, Hank comes to the rescue and saves Claude's life. The other soldiers also surround him, ready to protect their captain. Hank starts charging at Kane once again, who seems confident he won't lose. Suddenly, an unexpected hit from Claude wounds Kane. Hank takes this opportunity to put a little gift in Kane's face as well. It looks like they have won the battle, but the heavily injured Kane recovers from the injury like it was nothing. The soldiers remember that Kane is the vampire, a powerful beast invincible in the night. Kane asks Hank to join him and share his power over the world, which he immediately refuses. Knowing Hank's answer, Kane summons Shaw, who is bound in a new dress. Hank rushes to try to save her, but a few beasts restrain him. He pushes them away and almost gets her, but the spider lady appears and restricts him. Hank is forced to watch helplessly as Kane points yet another Nerf toy at Shaw. He remembers the scene of Elaine's passing, where he also watched quietly as Kane took him away from her. Hank tries his best, but Kane manages to put the Nerf attack into Shaw's body, making her fall to the ground lifelessly. This memory triggers Hank, who starts to go insane from rage. Kane watches, laughing, as Hank roars and unleashes his full power. His intense emotions have turned him into the Fenrir, the strongest form of the wolf. In this form, Hank has lost his mind and jumps out into the town, his path unknown. The next day, Claude wakes up in a camp, his body full of bandages. He goes out and sees a massive hole carved straight through the city from Hank's path. Lisa feels sad with him, seeing the unnecessary destruction, but turns around and sees Shaw on a stretcher. She sees the wound on her stomach, screaming in concern for her safety. Later, Shaw is walking with a crutch as her support, sad by what happened to Hank, but somehow alive and well. After Hank runs away to the wilderness, Kane starts stirring up chaos on his own. He gathers the frustrated local people and the elite rich class to start a newly independent nation with him and the Incarnates as their leaders. Kane promises to unify the world, taking over both northern and southern countries with his incredible power. This new country was called Patricia, which quickly began taking over the land of North and South. Seeing Patricia expand so quickly, the northern government gets worried. They start a mission to wipe out all of the remaining Incarnates to defeat Patricia. Later that night, a traveler huffs with exhaustion in a dark forest. Suddenly, his eyes grow wide as the shadow of a massive beast approaches him. In the morning, Shawl thinks about how she survived. It turns out that the Spider Lady had made her a dress with a bulletproof web which saved her life. She returns to her home village. There, the villagers are all shocked that she returned, not wanting the troublesome dragon girl to come back. Shawl also sees Lisa nearby, who beams in happiness upon seeing her. She asks what the military is doing there and learns that there is a beast nearby. Claude is also there and tells everyone in the village that they will take care of this monster. As he prepares to leave, Shawl suddenly grows determined and asks to come along with him. Claude accepts her since she is a local and familiar with the nearby land. They march along before setting camp along the way for the night. Claude tells Shawl that he's happy for her survival, saying that he'll make sure that another incident like that never happens again. Lisa comes over, enjoying Claude's brave words. She starts teasing him like a big sister, hugging him close to her plots before Claude breaks free. He reminds Lisa that he is actually her senior. This shocks Shawl, who learns that Claude is actually the son of the president and Kane's younger brother. Claude thinks he was only promoted because of his father and wants to perform his duty fully. Suddenly, a loud rumbling interrupts their chat. They go out to investigate, but Shawl looks horrified. She sees the massive beast and recognizes it as a rotting version of her dragon father. The soldiers start attacking the dragon, but it doesn't affect it at all. It turns around to leave, and Claude tells everyone to stop. Lisa explains to him that Shawl is so affected because the dragon is her father. Everyone wonders how William was able to come back from the dead. Gerald thinks that because the dragon was such a strong beast with a powerful life force, the remaining energy inside it turned it into a zombie. With this information in mind, Claude begins directing his soldiers to start planning an ambush. Shawl sits in the corner, looking at a family photo of her father and the orphans. Lisa comes up to comfort her. Shawl tells her all about her father, how he was a gentleman who just wanted to use his power to bring peace to the world. Lisa tells her that she should head back home since she might get emotional, but Shawl refuses, wanting to face her father in a final battle. Lisa sees her determination and gives her a box full of the legendary god killers. Later, the soldiers distract the dragon and drag it over to their ambush. Heavy weapons start attacking the dragon and a strong net captures it and restricts it to one place. However, the dragon is too powerful and breaks out of the restraints. It goes wild and starts flying in the direction of the village. Claude displays some great reflexes and immediately takes out of the dragon's wings with a rocket, bringing it down to the ground. Now, the soldiers only have little time to stop the dragon before it reaches and destroys its own home village. They head back home and warn the villagers to evacuate, but none of them want to leave their houses at night. Suddenly, a nearby explosion shocks them and they realize the danger they're in. Shawl goes in front of the incoming dragon, her rifle ready. She remembers the words of her own father, that one day, she will have to become strong enough to pull the trigger herself. With her father's own words, she remembers the kind of man he was and what he stood for. Realizing that this zombie dragon has lost all of its humanity, she knows he needs to put it down. Shawl launches attack after attack which seemingly do nothing to the dragon. It keeps on stepping forward and forward, and the emotional girl closes her eyes, praying to God as she keeps on attacking. Finally, the dragon is defeated and falls down. Shawl sees it lifting its claw towards her, but the gentle look in her eyes makes her stay. The dragon caresses her face one last time before closing its eyes forever. William's last moment spent with his daughter. After the incident is resolved, Shawl sits down in a corner to relax. Shawl gets emotional after the massive emotional burst she just went through, and Lisa hugs her to her chest. This embarrasses the girl, but she realizes that Lisa is just showing motherly affection to her, so she accepts her hug. After finishing things at the village, Claude prepares to leave for his hunt. Shawl asks to come along, but Gerald refuses because he doesn't want her to fall in danger. However, Claude thinks she is qualified enough to join and accepts her into his party. Somewhere else, a beautiful woman is singing in front of a smiling audience. Her soft voice and sweet melody charm everyone around her as she enjoys bringing them all happiness. This is just a flashback in Beatrice's mind, as she remembers her good old days, now over after the military started its campaign against all incarnates. In a military room, some generals report to the North President Richard Withers that their plan to eliminate all the incarnates will take at least 6 months. The president thinks this is way too long and orders them to do it quicker in 3 months. The generals obey and leave, thinking about how cruel and cold the president is. They know that he is just using his son Claude as a political pawn to gain sympathy among the people. Meanwhile, shifting to Claude in a port city, he angrily orders his officers to bring over supplies quicker. Gerald reminds him that their special equipment takes time to import, and Claude calms down. In the city market, Lisa and Shawl work together to buy groceries. Lisa thanks her for her help, but Shawl thinks she is just putting her strength to good use. Then, she suddenly hears some beautiful singing and runs out to the beach. There, she meets the beautiful Beatrice singing on a rock. Suddenly, a man comes up behind her, ready to take her out, but Beatrice makes him stop. The man, called Charles, thinks that Beatrice should be more careful about keeping herself hidden, but the gentle incarnate thinks that the innocent Shawl means no harm. William explains the reasons why Beatrice is hiding at the beach to Shawl, who nods in understanding. Beatrice tells her about her past life and how she used to bring smiles to everyone who listened to her. Unfortunately, because of the war, people stopped coming to the tavern she worried about, leaving her to feel worthless. Once the military started recruiting people to become incarnates, Beatrice was also invited to the program. With her new powers as an incarnate, she was able to put her enemies to sleep with her impressive quality. After the war ended though, Beatrice was left alone since nobody wanted to hear a monster like her singing for them. Then, the military orders made it even harder for her to show herself. Shawl sympathizes with her before offering to listen to her songs. She starts visiting Beatrice every day, giving her gifts and food and listening to her songs. As the days pass, Kane waits on an island with his little girl. They seem to be waiting for someone, but Kane thinks they will definitely visit soon. Meanwhile, Beatrice reveals to Shawl that she still wants to sing in front of the people again. However, she is scared that nobody will accept her. Shawl thinks that with time, people will accept her for who she is and listen to her beautiful songs once more. She heads back home where she meets Claude. He seems upset that she was out late and explains that the townsfolk hate the military, so any secret activities make them suspicious of them. Then, Claude tells her that Kane is actually his older brother and the leader of the patrician nation. He promises to bring the evil nation to an end even if it's the last thing he does. Shifting to a tavern, Charles is peacefully playing his piano alone. Some people enter the tavern with some weapons, whom Charles thinks are just customers. When they question him about the strange sounds they have been hearing from the beach, he grows serious. The guys grow more and more suspicious, and before they can say anything else, Charles suddenly gets up and knocks some furniture over before running out. Unfortunately, he is unable to avoid getting hit as he leaves through the door, leaving the building to catch on fire from the attacks. Back in her cave, Beatrice hears Charles's footsteps. She doesn't turn around, happily telling him that she has decided to one day go back to the human world and let them get slowly adjusted to her. When she realizes something is wrong, she turns around to see her dear friend hurt and wounded. With tears and pain in her eyes, Beatrice holds her friend. Charles warns her to leave the town, begging her to not hate the scared people for this. After Charles leaves for the afterlife, the people of the town start hearing a strange song. All of them start dropping asleep like a bunch of bowling pins, with a broken Beatrice singing her pain out. Claude and Lisa come out to check on the happenings, but Beatrice's singing affects her. Shawl also notices, and before she can put the others to sleep, she begs Beatrice to stop hurting the people. Beatrice remembers her humanity and wakes up, stopping her singing. Once she stops, though, Claude takes advantage of this and attacks her. Shawl tries to help Beatrice regain hope, but the mermaid thinks it's hopeless. She thinks that nobody will ever listen to her sweet songs again. However, Shawl promises her that she will be the person to listen to her every song, which gives her confidence once again. Beatrice starts beaming with a smile and starts to sing, but suddenly, Claude takes her down in front of a horrified Shawl. The wounded Beatrice starts singing another beautiful song, but Shawl stops Claude, saying it's not a bad song. Beatrice sings one last beautiful song, charming everyone with her sweet voice. Shawl holds her sweet and innocent friend in her arms, her eyes shedding tears. She tells Beatrice it was the best song she had ever heard. And the incarnate passes away, fulfilling her old wish of singing for someone once again. Later, after the mess is sorted, Claude tells Shawl that he was expecting her to help him take Beatrice down, not help her out. Shawl tells him that Beatrice was a good friend and she genuinely wanted to save her, making him grow quiet. Somewhere else in a snowy tundra, Hank approaches a beast in his werewolf form. His wild eyes hold no mercy for his opponent, who begs for his life. Hank is about to brutally attack him before he suddenly snaps out of his rage. He calms down but defeats his opponent anyway since he is beyond saving. However, a purple-furred beast watches Hank from a distance, his eyes filled with evil intentions. Hank keeps dragging his injured body along the freezing snow. In his weakness, he remembers the words of all his friends, Danny asking why he didn't deserve to exist, Arthur being scared of losing his life, Christopher losing his sense of justice, and the rest of the crew with all their wishes and fears. He feels himself getting dragged away by this nightmare, but snaps back to reality and starts walking again. This time, Hank encounters a purple werewolf, his former friend named Roy. Roy attacks Hank, demanding to know why he isn't joining Kane's team. Hank refuses to answer, saying that Roy has also lost himself and become Kane's lackey. He tells Roy that he has become a beast as well, but the purple-furred guy reminds him that he hasn't nerfed him yet. This time, Roy seems prepared to fight against his captain with the name Garm. An injured Hank grabs his spear and tries to fight back, but it is futile. Roy walks towards him but covers his eyes as Hank detonates a smoke grenade to run away from the battle. Close by, Claude, Lisa, Shawl, and the other soldiers march on, preparing to battle Hank and Kane's forces in this brutal landscape. Shawl walks with everyone, staying quiet but remembering that Claude is here to take down her friend Hank himself. She wonders how she will help Hank escape Claude's attack. Back to Hank. He hides behind a tree, waiting for a chance to strike at Roy. The purple beast sees him, and Hank thinks of the best plan to strike him with the legendary god killers. He jumps away and avoids Roy's attack before getting him in the chest, but suddenly Roy shakes off the hit and takes him down with ease. The beast feels angry that Hank is still fighting him in his human form despite it being night. He wants a real battle, but Hank seems out of the mood. Then Roy notices that it's getting daytime and runs away, promising to finish the fight later. Meanwhile, back to the soldiers. Claude limps with a leg injury, trying his best to keep up with everyone. Gerald checks him and finds out that he has a high fever, so he immediately gets him to rest. Shawl takes care of him while he sleeps, placing wet clothes over his forehead. When Claude wakes up, he feels a bit embarrassed that the little girl is taking care of him. She tells him that she is used to taking care of others from her experience at the orphanage. Then, Claude calms down and asks Shawl about the reason why she joined Hank on his journey. He thinks that the incarnates are a bunch of vicious beasts who harm everyone in their way. However, Shawl tells him that even though she used to think the same as him, once she started traveling with Hank, she found out that an incarnate could maintain their sanity by having a human connection. All these beasts needed was someone who knew them and cared about them, just like how Beatrice used to live happily with Charles. As they speak, Gerald approaches the room with important news. He goes in and informs Claude that the guards have spotted Hank nearby and a new incarnate beast as well. Claude is surprised by this information and tells him to prepare the soldiers for their final fight. Shifting to Hank, he experiences another nightmare where he loses all control because of Kane and goes berserk on every one of his friends. As Hank devours his former allies, he sees Elaine looking at him with disappointment, which wakes him up in a cold sweat. Poor Hank gets no time to chill as Roy comes back in the night, ready for round 2. Back at the military base, Claude informs his soldiers about the plan for taking down Hank. His ever makes him trip, and Lisa catches him. Gerald promises to execute the plan perfectly but demands that Claude stay home and rest. Lisa even offers him her soft plots for comfort, but that doesn't seem too interesting for Claude. Shawl, on the other hand, is fit and ready to go. Gerald warns her about the danger but lets her go with him. Meanwhile, Lisa drags Claude away to another room, where he feels embarrassed about having her babysit him. Lisa doesn't mind, thinking he is still an immature child. Claude gets offended by this, but she points out how reckless and angry he gets on the field. Then, she gets serious and discusses Claude's mission of eliminating all incarnates. Lisa points out that even Shawl wanted to take down Hank at some point, but when she started traveling with him, she started learning more and more about what incarnates were and why Hank was acting the way he did. Back to the battle, Hank tries to defeat Roy with a little toy. It doesn't work, and Hank gets smashed to the ground like he got tossed around by the massive wolf. Roy feels furious that his captain Hank is now so weak and useless. He remembers all the times Hank cheered him up on the battlefield, feeling frustrated. He reminds Hank of the words he said, that they were all incarnate beasts who would do their best to live on after serving the world. Hank shouts out loud, disagreeing with his previous statement. Then, he points out the obvious and touches Roy's sore spot, saying that he is just a doormat for Kane now. This enraged Roy, who tries deleting Hank then and there. Somehow, Hank manages to resist and finally turns into his real werewolf form. In this form, Hank is able to match every one of Roy's attacks. However, the insanity within him makes it hard for him to focus, making him scream out in pain. Shawl and the others hear his scream from a distance and begin running towards the source of the sound. Roy is shocked by Hank's performance and begins tossing him around like a sack of potatoes. He tells Hank that he is no longer the man he once was. In Roy's eyes, Hank goes back on his word and betrays them all, and he thinks that he has no idea how to truly save the incarnates. The mention of being unable to save anyone breaks Hank's heart, but before Roy can humiliate him even more, the military catches up to him and starts attacking him. Their attacks break off the ice chunk Hank is lying powerlessly on, making Hank fall into a cliff in front of everyone's shocked eyes. We see Roy's thoughts as he remembers his early days in the military. Back then, life was a living nightmare for him. Every second on the battlefield, he was scared of losing his life. Then, Roy got a ray of hope when the army offered to perform some tests on him. He agreed, but the tests were far more painful than anything he had experienced on the battlefield. After those horrifying experiments, he had finally gained the great power of an incarnate. After gaining his powers, Roy found his best teammate, Hank. Hank would go on missions with him together, and the two of them had great teamwork as werewolves. Hank's motivating words were the fuel that helped Roy's spirit blaze bright, but now he saw the same captain without any bit of fight left in him. At present, the attacks from the military force Roy to escape as Hank falls down a cliff. Hank sees Elaine in front of him, comforting him in her lap. He wonders if his time has finally come. But Elaine's voice slowly changes to Charles, which wakes him up in real life. Back on the battlefield, Roy does his best to avoid all the attacks from the soldiers. The wounds on his body slow him down, but he still manages to pick apart his opponents one by one. The soldiers report these losses to Gerald, worried about how to handle him. In the military's base, Lisa and Claude receive news of this devastating attack. Claude gets up to head to the battlefield. Lisa stops him, not wanting him to strain his body, but Claude tells her that he needs to be there as the leader of his troops. Back to the little cave Shaw saved Hank in, she tells him about what had happened in her village. Hank is shocked upon learning that William has come back to life and attacked his own village. He gets even more stunned when Shaw reveals that she actually defeated her own father. Shaw tells him that once she had performed that action, she finally understood how Hank felt every time he took away an innocent incarnate from the world. Hank is surprised by seeing how much she has changed but feels unsure about himself. He tells her that he has lost hope and wonders if his path is the right one. Hank remembers fighting alongside every one of his friends, sharing so many joys and sorrows together. This is why he wanted to lay them all to rest while they were still human and had not lost their entire souls. However, now Hank wonders if he even is worthy of deciding to do such a thing for them. He feels sad that he is beginning to lose control over his power every time he uses it, thinking he is turning into a beast himself. Shaw is overwhelmed by Hank's tears, and he suddenly gets called and speaks to her in a soft voice. Hank requests her to end his suffering, but she shakes her head. He smiles, realizing how foolish she was to think he could do it. Then, he gets up to leave and finish things off with Roy. Before leaving, she requests Shaw to always keep the incarnates alive in her memory. Back on the battlefield, Roy ambushes Gerald and manages to grab him. However, it is a trap, and several webs jab into the werewolf's body, restraining it. Gerald smiles as all the soldiers surround them, but Roy remains confident that he'll be fine. However, he doesn't expect it when the soldiers don't care about their commander in the middle as well as they begin lighting them both up. Roy realizes too late that Gerald wants to sacrifice himself to end his terror. Unfortunately for the soldiers, the guns are still too weak, so Roy is able to break out. He threatens Gerald's life, but finally, Claude arrives just in time and saves him as Roy runs away into the forest. Back in the cave, Shaw thinks about Hank's words. She realizes how much pain he is in, remembering Lisa's words that only a fellow incarnate could understand another incarnate pain. However, she still thinks that Hank deserves to live and gets up after making her decision. Meanwhile, Hank gets back to the battlefield and confronts Roy. This time, Roy doesn't care about proving his strength, and instead charges Hank full force to take him out. Hank smiles, prepared to lose his own life as he tries to make them both go out as fireworks. However, Shaw's weapon stops Roy in his tracks. The monster is shocked and taunts Hank for hiding behind a girl. However, Shaw keeps firing, not caring what he thinks about her. Somehow, Roy manages to jump at her, but Hank finally regains the courage to fight as he transforms into his werewolf form. With his full strength, Hank finally begins a good fight with Roy as the rest of the soldiers watch on with open faces. The wolves trade blow for blow, but Hank comes out victorious as he knocks Roy away. Roy accepts defeat. He tells Hank that he always found him very cool on the battlefield. Accepting his fate, Roy closes his eyes, and Hank finishes the job. Shaw comes up to him and asks him about what kind of person he is. Hank remembers how the cheerful Roy wanted to marry Shaw, and simply tells her that they could have been good friends. However, their moment together is interrupted when Claude and the rest of the military gather around him for an interrogation. Somewhere else, some more northern soldiers are marching towards a distant building. The men wonder what it is, but before they can report anything to their headquarters, arrows start picking them out like apples from a tree. Near the house, a centaur incarnate named Miles stands ready with a bow in his hands. He smiles at Kane behind him, pointing out that the North has found their base. A few survivors report the base to President Withers, who immediately orders his military to do whatever it can to get it removed. In nearby towns, soldiers from Kane's army begin marching through peaceful towns, tension brewing in the area. Shifting to a room with Claude and Hank in it, Claude questions Hank. He anxiously asks him about what happened that made his brother Kane betray anyone. Hank tells him that he has no idea, but all he wants is to stop Kane as well. Claude doesn't want to accept his help since he hates all incarnates, but Shaw points out that they both have the same goal. Then, she asks them to work together, but Gerald comes in and gives Claude new orders to move for Kane's fortress. The group begins leaving the next morning, with Hank wearing the military uniform, ready to help out as well. Lisa offers to let Shawl wear the uniform as well, but she instantly refuses. Then, they visit the sick soldiers, the consequences of war burning themselves in Shawl's mind before they leave. The group then meets Colonel Martin, who will be leading the mission to conquer Kane's fortress. Claude greets the old man, who reminds him that everyone in the world knows about the son of the president. Hank focuses on their plan and begins offering advice on how to make their move. He points out Miles's attacking style and how to overcome it, as Martin listens with interest. According to Hank, Miles cannot hit accurately at night and will get lured out by this. His plan is executed as soldiers gather around in the forest as bait. Miles comes charging in, taking out a few unlucky soldiers. Hank then reveals himself in his werewolf form to battle him one-on-one and asks why he turned to Kane. Miles thinks that it was just his right to keep on living as an incarnate, so he sided with Kane. He points his bow at Hank and the battle begins, but suddenly the rest of the soldiers trap him and he suffers a bunch of wounds. Hank gives him a finishing blow, thinking the battle is over. However, the incarnate shrugs them all off, saying he is basically immortal right now. After showing off all his strength, Miles runs away and heads back to Kane's fortress. There, he informs that Claude and Hank are indeed on their move. The next day, Martin asks Claude why he saw two incarnates fighting on the battlefield. Claude grows quiet, but Martin is polite enough to ignore it. Martin thinks that the military should use whatever means it can to finish its mission. Meanwhile, Shawl spends her time bored in the camp. She wonders how she can help out, and sees Lisa grumbling about carrying so much weight. She helps Lisa carry the weights, wondering what the future holds for them with Kane's planning. Switching to Kane's side, Miles treats a bunch of his injured soldiers. Kane wonders why he is doing it, pointing out that Martin still remembers the time he was an army doctor. Back at the military camp, some soldiers bring over a package to Martin. He grins evilly, feeling ready to complete his mission with it. At night, Shawl watches everyone relaxing. She goes to talk to Hank, who knows that she is feeling nervous. He tells her that she has changed a lot, but Shawl says the same, thinking he has started to laugh a lot more. Hank tells him that his whole life, he had been focused on his goal of completing his mission as the captain. However, because of Shawl, he realized that there was more to life and that his view might not be the correct one. Both of them share this precious moment, while Kane grins evilly in anticipation. The next day, everyone holds their breath as time ticks. Finally, Martin makes the signal to attack, and all the soldiers charge at the fortress. Both sides suffer great losses, but the soldiers keep on pushing, determined to defeat the enemy. Hank waits on the sidelines, wondering when Miles will come out. After a while, Kane finally lets Miles out, who starts rampaging and dominating the battlefield. The northern soldiers lead Miles to another trap, which ends up doing nothing once again. Miles recounted that during his old days, he had seen lots of suffering. However, when one day he was offered to become powerful and end the suffering of his own people by winning the war, he did everything he could. According to Miles, ending the enemy now is the only way for him to help his side. Hank knows that he has lost his soul and prepares to take out this lost soul. As the two beasts prepare to fight, Martin grins evilly, some strange bottles near him. Meanwhile, in a graveyard away from the battlefield, the Spider Lady and Migliglia feel excited for what's to come. The little girl casts a spell which surrounds all the graves. The smoke clears and rotting hands begin clawing out of the dry soil. Back to the battlefield, Miles is as cocky as ever. He taunts his captain, saying he looks like a broken man much like himself. He reminds Hank of the confidence he used to have, mocking him for becoming so soft. Despite that, Miles feels excited and begins battling him. Watching from afar, Martin grins and Claude questions if he knew this would happen. Martin calmly tells him to relax, saying that sometimes you need to betray your own friends. Hank and Miles engage in a fierce battle, going toe-to-toe. Martin orders a missile launch, which destroys a part of Miles. Miles seems as confident as ever, thinking he is immortal, but suddenly, he starts screaming in pain. Lisa and Claude are both surprised by what is happening. Claude gets mad at Martin for being so cold and using a gas that will hurt his own soldiers. However, Martin reveals his cruel side, treating the soldiers and incarnates as nothing but weapons. Hank gets away from the battlefield, recognizing it as Abai's poison as fellow soldiers start dropping like flies. He takes advantage of the moment and ends Miles once and for all. However, after Miles disappears, soldiers start disappearing from the northern camp as well. Everyone gets shocked as Kane effortlessly takes out soldier after soldier, approaching the arrogant Martin. Martin remains as confident as ever, not realizing how dumb he is being by ordering a firing squad on Kane. The bullets are as effective as paper balls on him, and Kane quickly starts disposing of all the pesky flies. After finishing off all of Martin's soldiers, he easily grabs him by his neck. Kane finds out the poison that Martin used and feels furious that he cheated in such a way. After taking control of Martin's body, he turns around and speaks to Claude. Claude gets up and prepares to fight his brother, but his hands shake with fear. Kane notices this and starts laughing, mocking Claude as he puts the same poison Martin used back in his mouth. After Martin turns into a bunch of purple glitter, Kane grabs Claude as well. However, this time, Hank saves him. Hank then asks Kane why he is doing all of this, and learns that Kane is actually planning to unite the Patricia Kingdom and the Southern Country. The group gets horrified to find out that all of the rulers of the Southern Kingdom have gotten offed by Kane's forces, leaving the land to him to control. Hank prepares to fight Kane, but he makes him look around at the horrifying scene around them. Kane blames humans for the production of the Incarnates and disgusting war weapons. He thinks that the Incarnates are superior beings and deserve to rule the world. Hank reminds him that it's not the case and all, and that Incarnates have a chance of losing their whole soul. He still believes in Elaine's vision and Kane remains stubborn. Hank transforms into his werewolf form as well for a final battle. Hank unleashes a flurry of attacks on Kane, but none of them have any effect on him. Slowly and easily, Kane begins pushing him back. However, Hank remains determined and keeps attacking as Shawl watches on with worry. Meanwhile, the northern soldiers invade and occupy Kane's old fortress. Back to Hank and Kane. Kane mocks him, believing that his own vision is the right one. Hank gets severely injured but remains stubborn. Kane tells Hank that in his current form, he can never defeat him. In his eyes, Hank has become too soft and appears as a human. An inferior human can never touch an incarnate in Kane's eyes. He urges his friend to give in to his feelings of power and release all his strength as the king of the beast, making Hank struggle internally. Hank remembers Shaw's words, remembering how much she believed in him and that he was still a human being. Shaw helps him stand up, the scene infuriating Kane. Seeing her support him like that reminds Kane of Elaine always helping Hank, the source of his jealousy and hatred for Hank. He charges at Hank with fury, but suddenly, the human werewolf blocks his attack and turns Super Saiyan. With his incredible power, he finally manages to damage and defeat Kane. However, before he can fully finish the job, Kane teleports away to save his life, seeing his own fortress captured. The battle ends for the moment, but the land is still filled with tension. The Patricia Kingdom has devoured the southern country, and the northern president orders for the country to be incredibly careful about its movements. As Kane remains on the move, the northern military relaxes. Shaw prepares to head back home for the moment, the soldiers hoping she can stay with them for a bit longer. Lisa offers to stay as well, but none of them seem interested in her or her plots. Hank and Shaw turn around to leave, with Gerald and Claude watching from a distance. Hank and the little girl discuss how far they have come, new hope and vision in their hearts as they keep on moving. Meanwhile, Kane is in a secret area. He visits a strange pod where a beautiful woman floats inside. He brings out a jewel and points it at Elaine, promising a new future. Thanks for watching till this long, my fellow men of culture. Don't forget to tell us about your favorite waifu from this anime and subscribe to the channel for more content.